All right, we're back. It's time to get into the waiver wire selections this week. Boone, we're going to go position by position here. I always feel like let's start with quarterbacks, and you're never excited to talk about these guys.
Yeah, please don't tune out if you are listening right now, because this is not
We
a
have
fun
good
position
picks
to go
coming up.
over here. Yeah, there's a lot of good players coming up, not so much in the quarterback section, but we do have to cover it. There's 4 teams on bye this week. We got some injuries. People might be looking for QBs. The guys I'm going to highlight here: Trevor Lawrence versus the Colts, Sam Darnold versus the Falcons, CJ Stroud at the Chiefs, and Marcus Mariota at the Vikings. And that one obviously has a little asterisk because that's depending on whether Jaden Daniels comes back or not. We already talked about Trevor Lawrence, just not a great fantasy play most games, just beat up on the Titans. They have some weapons there for him. Brenton Strange being back now, BTJ being back. They obviously picked up Jacoby Myers. So even though Parker Washington's got this hip thing, Trevor Lawrence could have an okay game. I just wouldn't expect a huge performance from him. Sam Darnold, the Vikings, his old team, they had his number last week. I know the Seahawks rolled in that game, but they really gave Darnold a hard time. He had a bad performance in that one. But overall, he's been good on the year, and I think he could bounce back indoors against the Falcons. CJ Stroud, this is where it gets really rough. And sadly, CJ Stroud is the guy that I wrote up in my column because unlike the other two that I just mentioned, he is under 50% rostered. So he's available in a bunch of leagues, but just a guy that you're kind of playing and hoping that some of these young players in the offense and hoping that Nico Collins can get through, because at the Chiefs is not a good matchup. But as you go further down, it gets worse than that. So believe me, Stroud is a guy that we're going to target here. And then Marcus Mariota, we saw what he just did in a pretty tough matchup, right? And it took until the end of the game to really get going there, but finishes with 294 yards, 2 touchdowns, 55 rushing yards. That's what he can give you. He can be that kind of Jaden Daniels light in this offense. And against the Vikings, it is a tough matchup. But like I said, he just had a tough matchup and he came through in that one. So the rushing ability gives him a fairly high floor. He's a decent streaming option as well.
Yep. Mariota would be the one I'd be excited about if there's no Jaden Daniels. All right, let's move to running backs here because I don't think we need to spend too much time on those quarterbacks.
I'm glad you didn't keep us there much longer. Good stuff. All right, so for running backs, another guy that is totally dependent on someone else potentially coming back from injury, that's Bam Knight on the Cardinals. He goes up against the Rams this week. Not a great matchup, of course, but it's going to come down to whether Trey Benson is going to play or not. Trey Benson, very weird last week where he returned to a limited practice, seems like he was going to have a chance to play, and then went DNP the next 2 days. So I don't know if he had a setback. There really hasn't been an update on this one. Hopefully he didn't have a setback that keeps him out longer here. Hopefully they just saw what he could do in that first practice and said, okay, you're not ready yet. We're going to give you another week. But really got to pay attention to that. But if you look at Knight, like since week 6, he's been the RB27 in fantasy points per game, played at least 40% of the snaps in every contest during that span. He's still splitting time with someone else, whether it's Amari DeMercado, who's hurt right now. More recently, it's been with Michael Carter, who also is an option. You could play him as kind of a risky flex. But Knight is somebody you could play as that RB3. You hope he finds the end zone. This week, he actually caught a touchdown, which I don't think anyone would have predicted, but he's gotten a decent amount of passing work here. And he's continuing to be the goal line option. So he's a guy that you could look to. Chris Rodriguez Jr., who we spoke about before he went on bye, he comes back from bye. And if you were thinking that Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt was going to get that post-bye rookie bump, it did not happen. It was still a committee. He did still get some work. But yeah, he is just not a part of their plans. They gave him a chance earlier in the season, and they did not like what they saw clearly. And now we're looking at Chris Rodriguez as the lead back in that committee. And even in a tougher matchup, he delivered with like his 4th straight usable fantasy performance, I would say, like 41 yards and a touchdown. Really, that touchdown doing a lot of heavy lifting, but that comes after he posted 65 yards and a score against the Seahawks. He had a touchdown against the Lions, had 85 yards on 16 touches against the Dolphins. So Chris Rodriguez just kind of keeps producing here, and not somebody that is going to win your week, but another one of those RB3 flex options, and you hope he finds the end zone and can give you a little bit more. He also, we mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the Commanders, he also has that date with the Giants in the first week of the fantasy playoffs. So if there was ever going to be a spiked week, that might be the one for Chris Rodriguez. And then we start to get into like the backup running backs that you want to stash. Blake Corum here going up against the Cardinals this week. And Kyron Williams, he suffered an ankle injury in that game. He left. I think he went to the locker room. There was some serious concern on Sunday that like Kyron might miss some time, but he came back. He finished the game. Ankle injuries can always swell up, within 24 hours after the game. They could still be a problem, so we'll keep an eye on that one. But regardless, Corum's continuing to do what he's done more often than not this year, which is give you some flex production, and he ended up having a pretty good game in this one. Even in a complimentary role, 55 scrimmage yards 3 times in his last 5 games, including this past week. So he's giving you that flex production, while also, if something happens to Kyren, Corum would just be a top 10 fantasy back immediately. He would be a guy that you'd be so happy to have on your roster. So go and get him before an injury happens. And, we saw that scenario last week, but we've been bringing up Corum forever, Harmon. Like, he's still only 16% rostered. Does not make sense to me. He should be rostered everywhere. And then if you want to talk about backups, Brian Robinson Jr., he's 25% rostered right now. 49ers are going on bye. We mentioned their great schedule in the fantasy playoffs. We do not want to see Christian McCaffrey get hurt, but if Christian McCaffrey got banged up, another guy, this would be a player that we'd be looking at as a top 10, top 12 fantasy back in that 49ers offense. Go and get him, especially if people are dropping him this week. Go and pick him up, put him on your bench just in case, just a break glass in case of emergency kind of play.
Blake Corum, 16% rostered. It's like just crazy, man. I mean, come on. Like, this guy needs to be on rosters everywhere. He is a guy that you can play. He's got usability and it's like some standalone value. It's a little bit what the heck flex-ish, but saw him get in the end zone recently. Like, that's obviously big. And again, like, if Kyren Williams misses this next week's game, which we have no idea at this point here on Monday, but he did have that ankle injury, he would be an immediate fantasy starter. So come on, like, 16% rostered. All the other leagues are asleep at the wheel. Again, I do want to keep saying this. We're going to do maybe next, I think we should probably do it next week after the games. Do like a backup running back ranking, and he would be very high up for me, would Blake Corum, as would Brian Robinson Jr. He's another guy that I realize you can't start him, but you want him on your bench just in case, knock on freaking wood, that anything happens to Christian McCaffrey. Let's get to wide receivers, because this is a pretty interesting group of players here.
Love seeing Adonai Mitchell's face there. This is great news that we finally have reason to put him here. Yeah, it's not just my fandom. It's actually, there's a real reason to put him in this graphic. He's going up against the Dolphins. Jaden Higgins, who we talked about last week, he's at the Chiefs. Jaden Reed versus the Bears. We're still waiting for him to come back from his injury. Hopefully he's going to be back soon. And then Isaac Tesla versus the Cowboys. And there's other guys we could mention, like Christian Watson, 53% rostered. So he's like just above that cutoff. He would be the number one guy on this list if he's available in your league. Alec Pierce, 56% rostered. Another guy that would be above all these 4. And Chris Godwin, 55% rostered. And like I said, I thought he looked a lot better and maybe starting to get a little healthier. He's somebody that you can consider as well. But focusing on these 4 guys, A.D. Mitchell, I mean, last summer, we'll bring it up again. Last summer at the Fantasy Football Expo, we were on a panel. We got asked the question, who's that player you die on a hill for? This was my answer. This was the guy. And it took him leaving the Colts. It didn't happen for him in Indy, but now he's getting this opportunity with the Jets to, at least while Garrett Wilson's out, be their number 1 receiver. And man, did he come through, right? 19 targets over the last 2 games here. In week 12, that only resulted in 2 catches for 42 yards, but we still saw something in that game. And then this week, over 100 yards, scores a touchdown. We're not going to expect that from him every single week. I don't need to put that caveat on it. He is not going to produce like that in every game, but he has that kind of potential, and we finally got to see it there. So that was great. I'm keeping him in like the wide receiver 4 flex option range, but he is certainly a player that I think should be picked up. And like I said, at least until Garrett Wilson comes back, we're going to see him produce, and he's going to have a chance to put up these boom weeks. And then once Garrett Wilson comes back, if Garrett Wilson comes back, he will still have some value as the number 2 in that offense. And it's great that we're seeing Tyrod Taylor under center, because it's given some of these pass catching options a chance to show what they can do. And they weren't getting that opportunity with Justin Fields out there. Jaden Higgins, we don't really have to talk about again. It's a lot of the same stuff that we said last week, right? He's doing pretty well. He's starting to come on a little bit. He's starting to play a little bit more, at least 55 yards or a touchdown in 5 of his last 6 outings. Been the wide receiver 36 during that stretch. So you could start to look at him as a wide receiver 3 flex option. I'm still viewing him as a wide receiver 4 flex, but he has some upside, certainly. Jaden Reed, it's just going to be whether he can come back and be healthy. We don't have to go through the whole thing again about him, but there have been stretches during his career where he has been a top 24 fantasy receiver for fairly long stretches. We even saw it last year at the beginning of the season. And then the second half of the year, he completely fell off. So let's get him back. Let's see if he's healthy, has some fresh legs, and can get out there and actually do something. Of all the guys we're mentioning here, like ceiling wise, he has a huge ceiling. If he comes back and he's healthy,
Absolutely.
even though he kind of plays that limited role in their offense, he still could have a really big one. And then Isaac Tesla, this is coming down to the Amon-Ra St. Brown injury. Concerned about that one. Could it cause him to miss? They play on Thursday, so even though they played on Thanksgiving, you would think they'd have the extra time for him to heal up. Nope, they're just playing 1 week later against the Cowboys. And we've seen he hasn't done much. Normally we don't talk about receivers who, have only had one 35-yard game in their career, which just happened, of course.
6 catches.
But he scored touchdowns, right? So it's good. It's good that we're seeing him do something. I think he's flashed a little bit, and he's a player that you could look at least a streamer this week.
Yeah, no, Isaac Tesla, definitely a streamer candidate if Amon-Ra St. Brown does not play. He had some work in the slot as well. He ran the same amount of routes in the game as Jameson Williams did when Amon-Ra St. Brown went down, did Isaac Tesla. And I think he's got some talent. He's definitely a raw player, but I charted him for reception perception as a prospect, and not like no college production, not a lot of college production, not a lot of stats to deal with there, but showed some skills. Obviously a true legitimate freak show athlete with high-end athletic comparables. So I think Dan Campbell likes him. I think he'll get involved on some of those crossers, the in-breakers. We saw that in very small glimpses against the Packers on Thanksgiving as well. So definitely someone that I think is in contention, in discussion in that game. And I'll just note on Adonai Mitchell here, route participation, 64%, 85%, jumped up to 98% in these 3 games with the Jets. Like, he's trending up. He's been targeted on at least 24% of his routes in all 3 of those games, culminating with a 30% target per route in this past game. So this is definitely not a fluke. He's a talented player that I loved Aaron Glenn talking about it after the game too. Like, this guy's not a throw-in. Like, we wanted this guy here. He said he went to high school with one of his kids. Like, he's been following this guy's career for a while. And AD Mitchell needs that type of belief, because he's a little bit of a wayward soul. And I think having that belief from the head coach, it's empowering for your guy, AD Mitchell. And I think if Jaden Reed doesn't come back, I do think Dontavian Wicks is not completely chasey to add him in an emergency situation as well, because I like the role he has in this Packers receiver room.
Yeah, I had Wicks listed in the waiver wire column as well. Of course, people can go check that out and read the full column, which not only has these players, but a bunch of others, and they're all valued there in different categories. Let's jump to tight ends here. It's kind of boring as well. There's good players, don't get me wrong, but it's just the same names that you've seen every week,
guys,
right? Colston Loveland, Brenton Strange, Harold Fannin, Darren Waller. Loveland is producing. We knew last week was going to be a down week against the Eagles. That was a tough matchup. But if you look at this player, this guy looks like he is going to be a star, Harmon. He is playing very well. He's a good pass catcher in a good offense. I can't wait to see what he's going to do in his career. Brenton Strange, 2 games now. This week it wasn't as big yardage-wise, 45 yards, but he scored that touchdown to put him over the top. And that's the thing I said last week, which was he just needs to start scoring some touchdowns, and that could move him into the tight end 1 conversation. He's there now. He's potentially a top 12 option. Harold Fannin, every week. He's just one of those staples of this. And then Darren Waller's an interesting one where he comes back this week. He doesn't find the end zone, which he did a bunch with his first few games with the Dolphins, but 47 yards this week. And again, that's not a bad day for a tight end. We're going to see him find the end zone in the future. So those are all, I think, really good options at tight end, guys. And I mentioned last week, we did one of the bold predictions, and I said Darren Waller could potentially be a top 8 fantasy tight end the rest of the way. I stand by that. I still think he could do that. We'll see some more touchdowns from him. So all those guys are pretty good plays for fantasy.
If you had to pick up one and start this week, who would it be between those 4 guys?
It would be in the exact order that I have them there. It would be Loveland first, even though I think some people might rank Strange higher. But for me, it's still Loveland. I'm chasing that talent, and he's been producing pretty well, even though he hasn't had a huge game since that massive 188-yard game or whatever it was a month ago. But he's still been producing all along the way, with the exception of that tough matchup.
He looks awesome. Looks like he's going to be a future stud, does Colston Loveland. Speaking of stud, speaking of awesome football player, your deep stash of the week. Look at that.
It's not even the first time. Not even the first time that we've mentioned him in this deep stash section.
Let me have it. Shut up.
Jalen Coker, right? Over 50 yards, 2 of the last 3. And he's a bit of a sneaky pickup as well, because they're going on bye this week, right? He just had a really good game, 4 for 74 and a touchdown. Now they're going on bye, so people might not be looking at him on the waiver wire. You could grab him. Let's see when they come back in week 15 if he can keep this up. But both of us have said this guy could be the number 2 receiver in this offense and can produce, and I hope he continues to get that chance.
Oh, that touchdown he had was so sick. Lined up as the isolated receiver, press man coverage win, 4th down. Jalen Coker, baby. Come on down. Yeah, Boone. I mean, zip it, okay? You know, we did tell the people that we've had him as his deep stash before. We're excited about Jalen Coker. It was really cool to see that game against the Rams. I agree. Deep stash candidate Jalen Coker. I hope they continue to get him involved. They need him to be involved because he looks like a good football player, and they need some more good football players